Money, as they say, talks, and in the case of two EU countries, it's shouting no very loudly. Hungary and Poland are blocking the release of billions of dollars to other member nations. What is going on? This is Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. The European Union's 7-year budget and emergency COVID funding have been vetoed by Hungary and Poland because they say they would unfairly be denied access to that money. The sums involved in this budget battle are enormous. More than $1.25 trillion for the EU's 7-year spending plan and $890 billion for the Coronavirus Recovery Fund. Many countries are desperate for the cash, but the money is going nowhere because of a conflict over a key EU principle, the rule of law. That's broadly the idea that everyone in society follows the law and power is not exercised unfairly. Europe's Parliament wants member states to have funding cut if they don't stick to the rule of law. Hungary and Poland have been accused of that in the past, and they have blocked the $2 trillion spending package. Their accusation that the EU is guilty of budget blackmail. Well, we go straight to the Hungarian capital, Budapest, and welcome back to Roundtable, Andras Laszlo, advisor to the governing party Fidesz. We then go to Oxford. In the UK, Michael Taylor's there, senior Eastern Europe EU analyst at Oxford Analytica, and in Brussels, we welcome back policy analyst Pieter Cleppe. Good to have you all on the programme. So when it comes to the rule of law in Hungary and Poland, is the EU saying you have corrupt systems, Peter?
Well, indeed, for years now, there have been allegations coming from Brussels and basically Western European capitals that Hungary, Poland, and some other countries may be backsliding in terms of rule of law. In order to do something about that, a mechanism has been created, has been agreed at the EU level, which involves that any payments to these countries, or basically to any European member states, can be cut if it is deemed that the rule of law in a certain member state is no longer sufficiently guaranteed. Now, that arrangement has been agreed at the EU level. Hungary and Poland were not able to block it, but they have, in response, been blocking the so-called recovery fund that is supposed to splash out a lot of money and arrange for joint EU borrowing in order to deal with the economic fallout of COVID. So now the question is, will EU leaders manage to ultimately convince Hungary, Poland, and actually also Slovenia, which has been supporting the Hungarian and Polish governments?
Okay, Michael, let me bring you in because it's interesting that Peter mentions Slovenia. It is, according to the figures I've checked, the country 6th in the European list of those that are worst affected by coronavirus. It needs a stimulus to its economy, as do so many other people. Why is Slovenia saying, yeah, what you're doing in Hungary and Poland is okay?
Slovenia, well, in particular, the Prime Minister of Slovenia, a man called Janez Janša, is a close ally of Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, aligns with him very closely. He's sticking with Viktor Orban. He's sticking up for him. He's making the argument that this is a political issue. It's pure politics, that there's antagonism between certain countries, certain governments. And this is all politics. It's nothing to do with reality.
And is that the case in your opinion? Is it about political point scoring, or does the EU have a case specifically when it comes to Poland and Hungary?
I think, well, actually, we talk about Poland and Hungary as if they're the same. In fact, the issues are quite different between the two of them. But I don't really buy the argument this is just politics, because when you're looking at countries like Netherlands or Austria, they're centre-right countries. They're not particularly enemies of Orban or Kaczynski in Poland. I mean, you know, there's an attempt to say, well, the European Parliament is being very political here. Yes, the European Parliament is very political. All strands of opinion are represented. But when it comes to the Council, you're looking at other governments. I don't see the argument that they've got a kind of particular political animus against just Hungary and Poland.
And Andras, I know you say this is bullying that's been going on for years on behalf of the European Union, particularly when it comes to your country, Hungary.
Yes, it does. And I would refer back to the words of Peter, specifically when he used the words allegedly and maybe backsliding in these countries. This is exactly what we don't want in such a mechanism. When we want to talk about rule of law, we have to be very clear about what the conditionality is, what the mechanism for sanctioning is, and what are the legal remedies. All of these are missing in this current debate. We have no problem with rule of law. Our concerns are mostly with how you would measure this. And it's pretty much undefined still until this day. And what Michael just said regarding Slovenia and basically financial stress, not only in Slovenia, but other member states. We don't want this debate, which should be about principle and setting up a clear mechanism, to be decided and basically rushed through because of financial urgency.
But there is a massive financial urgency here, isn't there? I mean, some countries are suffering terribly. They need these rescue packages to rescue their economies. If you, that is Hungary and Poland, continue to block this, people are going to suffer.
People will suffer in any way. They're already suffering since the COVID crisis. On the other hand, in no previous EU budget was there a conditionality on rule of law or any other kind of political conditionality. So introducing it now is specifically delaying a decision. A very hard compromise has been achieved at the July European Summit. Everyone knew it was going to be very difficult because there were different groups of states with different sensitivities. There were the frugal four who did not want to spend a lot of money, who did not want to raise the common budget, who did not want to have a big common loan. And Hungary was also among the countries where there was no financial urgency. Our compromise was to agree to a common debt that we otherwise wouldn't want or wouldn't need. This has been agreed. The European Parliament knew, and the entire international community who followed this summit knew how difficult it was to agree to a common position, to a compromise solution. This has arrived, and it took afterwards months by the time, on behalf of the Council, the German presidency negotiated with the Parliament and basically overruled the July European Summit in such a way that
okay, so let me ask Michael
by the European Parliament.
Let me ask Michael to respond to something you said. If this is, as Andras is suggesting, simply about Poland and Hungary wanting a level playing field when it comes to establishing what is the rule of law, why has that not been agreed?
Poland and Hungary regard themselves as being singled out. I mean, they've both got Article 7 procedures against them, which are on similar issues, on rule of law already, which have not got very far. I mean,
Sorry, Article 7 being what?
It's a procedure to say that well, it's rather like what's happening now. It's saying that EU values are not being observed, and it's in the treaties. It's a procedure which the crucial difference is it proceeds only by unanimity. So what's happened now, the change that's happened since the July summit, was that this was a way the EU could try and put pressure on Poland and Hungary by using qualified majority, not unanimity.
Values are a subjective area, aren't they? Unless it's absolutely laid out. And if it's laid out, then you either are in breach of it or you are not. Or it is subjective, it's what somebody thinks.
Yeah, that's what Budapest and Warsaw are saying, that they're not clear about what's being required of them. Well, maybe, but rule of law has been defined, I think, in the agreement of 5th November as judicial independence. I mean, that's more precise, I think. I mean, you can look at sort of things that have happened in Poland where the Judicial Council of appointed judges had been largely composed of judges themselves, the PIS government in Warsaw changed that so that actually the judges were replaced by members of parliament. Well, that was a clear case of the legislature coming in and saying, we're going to appoint the judges from now on.
Okay, I'll get Andras to address that in just a moment, but Peter, I want to bring you back in at this particular moment. Let's talk about the harm that this delay in the budget and the emergency package may well be causing. Which countries are feeling the pinch most right now?
Well, I think it was Italy that was going to be one of the big benefactors of the recovery package. Now the question is, in the first place, whether that recovery package is such a good idea. I mean, if you look into it, what happens is that European countries will be jointly issuing debt, so they will be imposing even more debt to already very deeply indebted European citizens. It all happens in a very centralized way. And if we look at the track record of EU spending, I don't think it's fair to say that this has been remarkably outstanding. EU funds have been rife with fraud, waste for years. That's not just independent analysts concluding this. It's also the EU's own auditor, the EU Court of Auditors, which again this month came out with another annual report concluding that there were an unacceptably high level of errors in EU spending. So I think we have to take a step back. And obviously there's much to say about the rule of law in Hungary and Poland, but also in many other member states. And there's a danger of double standards. But in the first place, is it really such a good idea to have this billions and billions of euros transferred between European countries? I mean, the single market is bringing Europeans together. You know, it helps them to trade, to marry each other, to facilitate bureaucracy when interacting cross-border. Every time there.
Do you mind if we get onto that in just a moment? You know, about whether in fact it's a good idea to lend all of this money, but concentrate at the moment on what is being said about Hungary and Poland. This was what Viktor Orban, Hungary's Prime Minister, had to say in Brussels. They only view countries which let migrants in as those governed by the rule of law. Those who protect their borders cannot qualify as countries where rule of law prevails. Is this anything, Peter, to do with the supposed right-wing policies of Viktor Orban, the fact that he's ruling by decree? Is that what this really is about?
Sorry, he's not ruling by decree.
I think you have to look at a different question. The question is there a chance that people will be able to credibly claim so? Now, I do think there is a chance, because people can easily bring up the Spanish government and their treatment of the Catalan separatists. Now, I'm not saying that the Spanish government, therefore, have been overstepping the mark. I think even also with Hungary and Poland, it's often quite complex. But when you leave this to a political judgment, I do think that the Visegrad Four, so to speak, or at least Hungary and Poland, they have a point of complaining about this. I personally would rather see judges deal with that, actually. If you ask me.
Andras, you wanted to say something. I think it was about when I stated that Viktor Orban was ruling by decree. If I'm out of date on that, because I know he was, then I apologise. But let me move on a little bit. You say the future of Europe is at stake here.
Yes, it is. There's a growing distrust between member states, and linking this issue with migration is not by chance. If you look back at political statements starting from 2015, that's when this original idea was born, that member states which do not want to take in migrants according to the obligatory migration quota plan would be stripped from EU funding. This is where it all originates from. This has followed on for several years. If you look back only 1 or 2 years, there were high-level politicians, ministers, even prime ministers, if I remember correctly, who said that we will want to strip countries from EU funds who do not accept migrants. The fact that they have not been able to make this a reality and EU budget negotiations have begun. They now want to include this in this situation. This is entirely unfair. If you look at the EU treaties, it clearly says that Article 7 procedure is the only procedure to look at if European values are violated by any member state. If there's a problem with a concrete legislation, then infringement procedures may take place. And if there's a disagreement, the European Court of Justice will decide. All of the mechanisms for legal certainty are set down in the treaties, or there are existing mechanisms. The only problem is it doesn't bring the political outcome that some of our political opponents would like to see.
Okay, and
so
we will go into that. We will go into that in just a little bit, if we may. But what about this? Johannes Hahn, EU Budget Commissioner, saying this is not about ideologies, but about help for our citizens in the worst crisis since World War II. It behoves all of the European Union, whether that be those countries that are saying you should not be vetoing this, and it also includes Poland and Hungary. It's time to set aside differences and sort them out, perhaps later, surely?
Well, then let's sort out rule of law mechanism later.
Okay. Is it possible, Michael, you think, for this to be settled in any way amicably so that the countries that really need the money will get it?
Hard to say. I'm not sure how angry the other EU members are going to be at potentially the budget being held up. I mean, this is not just about the recovery fund. This is about the 2021-27 budget as well. That's also being held up by the veto. And so, Poland and Hungary talked about they're being blackmailed. Well, in a sense, they're blackmailing the rest of the EU with their veto. So, whether people, to be honest with you, the EU is being pretty shambolic about how it organizes these things. I feel a certain sympathy for the EU because it's not really a very tight, well-organized organization. It's a loose association of sovereign states. And so getting them all to work in step together on anything is almost impossible. So
let's throw this back to Andras, if we may, and say, why not, as Michael suggests, put this to one side, withdraw the veto, get the money out there, get economies going again, and sort it out later?
Well, we believe that if this is about solving a crisis, then we should focus on solving a crisis and not include political conditionality. If this is about a 7-year budget, then legal certainty should apply to finances, and it's just currently missing. There's no reason to include political conditionality in budgetary regulation. When Jean-Claude Juncker was still president of the European Commission, he clearly said he's not in favor of linking the budget with political conditionality. When head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, had to pronounce on this issue, he shared the same view that there should be no political conditionality linked to the budget. It's different issue, different policy with existing mechanisms. There's just no need to mix the two.
Peter, what happens next?
Well, let me make a prediction with the chance of being completely wrong, obviously. But I do think in the end there will be a deal. I mean, the stakes are very high. First of all, for Hungary and Poland, that are net benefactors from EU funds. I would doubt that ultimately there will be no deal. Also because, look, even if Hungary and Poland completely give in and do not get any concession, even then I do suspect European governments will be very wary to actually activate the ability to withhold funds on the basis of rule of law infringements, because diplomatically this is, of course, it's almost like a nuclear bomb, and I don't think they will easily trigger that. Of course, at some point they may decide so, but I mean, there's always the chance of double standards being used, and you really enter uncharted territory. I think if you do that, That said, I do think European governments would be willing to cut funds for other reasons ultimately. But I'm suspicious. I don't think this mechanism will ever be properly applied. Maybe wrong, but I don't think so.
And if the money isn't available at the beginning of next year, which is when it was supposed to be agreed and the cash was supposed to be starting to go out in springtime, what will be the effect on those countries that really need it, on their economies?
Well, then we go into a system called provisional 12th, which basically means that sort of the budget of the last year is being used as a basis. So in effect, that means indeed certain cuts to certain programs. And yeah, I don't know the exact figures. I remember for Hungary, it was something.
But that means no coronavirus cash, if it's last year.
Yes, as Michael pointed out, the veto also applies to the multi-annual budget, which is supposed to run from 2021 to 2027. So yeah, that's a lot of cash. That's agricultural funds, regional funds being held up, potentially some other programs as well. I mean, not entirely, but at least partially, because we're in that provisional 12th logic. So indeed, I mean that's going to have an effect on countries that derive a lot of their GDP and also importantly a very high percentage of their investments from external resources like these.
Andras, I will come to you in just a moment because we're getting towards the tail end of the program and I'd like you to wrap it up for me. So I'm going to go to Michael at this particular point, ask you a similar set of questions to those I just put to Pieter. Will it be resolved in time?
Well, I think the problem is for Hungary and Poland is that there is a way out for the rest of the EU that they could go along with this temporary arrangement, which is basically carrying over the 2020 budget into 2021. So you've got the same sort of spending that you had last year, you'll have this year, while setting up their own intergovernmental agreement that would cover the recovery funds. I think that's the problem that Hungary and Poland have, is that basically the EU 25 could go off on their own. And also the carrying the budget over from 2020, there's a lot of argument over whether...
Let me stop you for a second. Would that mean that Hungary and Poland would not get any money, but the rest of the member countries would?
Yeah, they wouldn't get the recovery money. That would go just to the coalition of the willing, if you like.
So, Andras, there's a danger here, isn't there, that by standing up for what you say is a matter of principle, you could end up actually, as they say, cutting off your nose to spite your face, because you would be financially worse off and nothing would have been resolved when it comes to the rule of law?
I'm not sure. First of all, I'd like to come back to what Pieter said. I also share the opinion that there will be a deal struck at the end of the day. The question is when that deal is struck. I don't believe an agreement between 25 member states would be a solution, because it just means a whole new round of negotiations on a completely different and a lot more complex deal to come. That will not be a quick recovery budget, which member countries now would like to see. Also, I'd like to point out that we're not in the situation where we were after the 2008 crisis. It is possible to get loans from the market. There's no need actually for member countries to go and issue let's say a joint debt or take on a joint debt. Countries could, with different rates, but they could borrow from the market. Hungary has already borrowed a large sum in spring during the coronavirus situation. So this is also possible now. What was mentioned.
So you're saying Hungary's not desperate for the money,
Well, I'm saying that there are more than one. There's more opportunities, or there's more solutions to this situation. But the Prime Minister was very clear that he would like to see an agreement. He's not going to veto the deal just for the purpose of vetoing the deal.
Okay, so what do you believe will happen next, Andras?
Well, we'll see. Of course, we don't know what happened in July, how they came to the agreement during that almost historic 5-day summit. We don't know what went behind the closed doors, and they're going to reconvene again in mid-December. I suppose negotiations bilaterally will be very intense till then, and it will be again a very difficult compromise in December. We'll see what happens. I think there's a will from all parties to arrive to an agreement. I think everyone takes this situation very responsibly. The question is how certain parts of the European Parliament will react. From their reaction,
and there we have to
now,
leave it. I'm sorry to cut you short. I'm sorry to cut you short, but time is our enemy. I listen to views from Budapest, from Brussels, and from London, and from me, David Foster, from my home studio. Thank you very much for watching. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, from all of us at Roundtable, goodbye.